After 8 years of running my father's company, I tripled its value. At a board meeting, a senior partner scoffed, "You're just playing CEO." I said, "We'll see." The next morning at work changed everything. I had never expected to be the one running Calhoun Enterprises. Growing up, my father's company seemed like a world apart from mine. My brothers were the loud, confident types, and I was the quieter one, always in the background, always content to let them take the lead in family matters. But when my father's health took a sharp turn for the worse, everything changed. I was 22 when I found myself stepping in as the acting CEO. My brothers, who had their own careers, didn't want the responsibility. My father's words still echoed in my mind as I took the reins, "Can you take care of it, Izzy?" There was no hesitation in my answer, because I knew I had to. I loved my family, and I loved this company, but this was bigger than me. I had to prove myself. The first few years were rough. There were those who didn't believe in me, a young woman with no formal business training. But I took it in stride. I worked long hours, learned the ins and outs of the company, and built a new team. Slowly, I made changes. We launched new products, streamlined processes, and built new partnerships. And slowly, the company began to grow. By the time I turned 30, we had tripled in value, expanded into international markets, and established ourselves as leaders in our sector. But there was one person who didn't believe in me. Duncan Hayes, a senior partner who had been with the company for years, would always find ways to undermine me. He'd look at me like I was a child playing dress-up when I made decisions, always questioning my authority, always dismissing my ideas. At first, I ignored it, but the frustration built up. He was the one person I could never win over. And at every board meeting, he'd make his disapproval known. It was at one of those meetings that everything came to a head. The air in the conference room was tense, the kind of tension that came with making big decisions. We were talking about our upcoming plans for an international launch, and everyone was on edge. But I felt ready. I had spent weeks preparing for this, consulting with experts, analyzing data, and crafting a plan that I believed would take the company even further. Then Duncan spoke. "That sounds cute, Izzy," he said with a scoff, "but let's be honest. You're just playing CEO. You didn't earn this, you're just filling in for your father." I'm sure he'd be turning in his grave if he saw what you're doing with the company. The words hit me harder than I expected. The room fell silent, everyone waiting for my reaction. But I had learned to control my emotions over the years. I wasn't going to let Duncan get under my skin. I took a breath and, with as much calm as I could muster, replied, "We'll see." The moment passed, but the damage had been done. Duncan's words lingered in my head as I went about my day. I knew this wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about me, my identity, and my place in this world. I wasn't just filling in. I was leading. And I would prove it. But what Duncan didn't know, what no one knew, was that the next morning, everything would change. I arrived at the office early the next day, as I always did. The building was quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the hallways the only sounds. But when I reached my office, something was wrong. The door was cracked open, and there was a strange chill in the air. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My heart stopped. Paperwork was scattered all over the floor, confidential documents, reports, files I had been working on for months. Everything was shredded. My laptop, which had been left open the night before, was wiped clean. It was like an explosive had gone off in my office, and every trace of my work had been erased. I felt a wave of panic, but I pushed it down. Someone had done this. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. My hand shook as I reached for my phone and dialed IT. "Can you come up here?" "My office." "Everything's gone." Within minutes, a team from IT arrived, and they started digging into the system. But there was nothing. No trace of the files. No trace of what had been done to my computer. It was as if the entire system had been wiped clean overnight. The next few hours were a blur. IT combed through the building, looking for any evidence of a security breach, but there was nothing. Whoever did this had covered their tracks. It didn't take long for me to realize this wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was hampered. And I had a feeling I knew exactly who was behind it. I didn't have much time to sit in shock. This was my company, and I wasn't about to let it all slip away. I called a meeting with the board, but when Duncan walked into the room, I saw that same smug look he always wore. He didn't know yet that I had figured it out. "We've had a breach," I said, standing at the head of the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone has hampered my office and wiped everything from our system." Duncan raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "What are you suggesting, Izzy? Are you saying someone on the inside did this?" "I'm saying you did," I replied, my voice low but steady. "I know you've been working with our competitors, feeding them information. I have proof." The room went silent, the tension palpable. Duncan's face went from smug to pale in seconds. "You can't prove anything," he muttered, but I could see the crack in his confidence. "I don't need to prove it. I have everything I need." "And you'll be gone before the end of the day," I said. The next few days were a whirlwind. I had Duncan removed from the board and, with legal help, exposed his dealings with our competitors. It caused a massive wrongdoing, but it was also a moment of clarity for me. I had been questioning myself, my ability to lead, for years. But now, I know. I wasn't just playing CEO. I was the CEO. And I was going to take this company to places Duncan could only dream of. But the aftermath wasn't easy. There were those who were still skeptical, and the recovery was slow. But I had the drive, the vision, and the team to make it happen. And slowly, as the months went by, the company came back stronger than ever. We grew beyond what I ever thought possible. But that morning, when everything changed, was the moment I proved to myself, and everyone around me, that I wasn't just filling my father's shoes. I was building my own legacy. The recovery process after Duncan's exposure was grueling. It wasn't just about getting rid of him, it was about regaining trust. The board had to be reassured, the employees had to believe in my leadership, and the shareholders had to see that I could weather the storm. It was a complicated balancing act, and I was constantly on edge. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I would define it. The first few days after the wrongdoing broke were the hardest. There was a lot of cleaning up to do. I had to personally address the concerns of the employees who had worked under Duncan's shadow, the ones who had either been complicit or too afraid to speak out. But I couldn't just throw them under the bus. I had to get them back on my side, show them that I was someone they could trust. I spent hours in meetings, one-on-one conversations, and town halls. I answered questions, took responsibility where it was needed, and made sure to emphasize that the company's future was about more than just my personal struggle. It was about us, together. Slowly but surely, things began to shift. People started coming forward with their concerns, their ideas, and their hopes for the future. And I listened. But even as things started to stabilize internally, there was a constant pressure from the outside. Media coverage was relentless. Some outlets painted me as a victim of betrayal, others labeled me as naive, a leader who had been manipulated for too long. But there was one thing they couldn't deny: I was standing tall in the face of adversity. As much as I tried to keep my focus on the company, the media attention started to take its toll. I couldn't escape it. Every time I walked into a meeting, every time I made a decision, there was a whisper, a scrutiny of every move I made. It was exhausting. My phone was filled with messages, calls from journalists, and friends who wanted to know what was really going on behind the scenes. Even my family was affected. My brothers, who had been largely absent during the whole ordeal, called to check in. At first, they were supportive, but their words felt hollow. It wasn't until I spoke to my oldest brother, Owen, that I realized how much I still needed their backing. "Are you sure you're okay?" Owen asked over the phone one night, his voice softer than usual. I took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Owen. It's just A lot. I know, he said quietly. But you've done so much already. Don't burn yourself out. Dad would be proud of you. Those words meant more than I expected. My brothers had always been critical, but there was something in Owen's voice that made me pause. He wasn't just being the older brother trying to offer empty comfort. He actually meant it. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I felt. But it still didn't change the fact that I had to fight this battle alone, at least for now. Weeks passed, and we were beginning to rebuild. The company's value held steady, despite the media frenzy. But just as I thought things were starting to settle, I got an unexpected call that threw me into a new storm. It was from Lyle Davis, the competitor who had tried to offer me a deal the day after the Hampered. He had called multiple times since, but I had always ignored his calls. This time, though, I picked up. "Izzy," he said, his voice smooth and patronizing as always. "I think we need to talk." "I'm not interested," I said sharply. "Oh, but you should be," Lyle continued, "because things are about to get even messier. You see, Duncan wasn't the only one with a plan. There's a few more people who feel like you've overstayed your welcome. It's not just about the company anymore. This is bigger than you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see soon enough," Lyle said. "Let's just say, this isn't over. You don't know who you're dealing with." He hung up before I could respond. My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone, the weight of his words sinking in. My stomach dropped. What did he mean? And who were these people he was talking about? I spent the next few hours on edge, trying to figure out what Lyle was planning, but every lead I followed turned up nothing. It was maddening. The silence after his call felt suffocating, as though the calm before the storm was stretching on far too long. But I couldn't let fear control me. I had to stay focused. The company couldn't be distracted by shadows or threats, no matter how real they felt. I called an emergency meeting with my leadership team the following morning. They were all curious, asking about the status of the competitors and how we were planning to handle the external pressures. But I had no concrete answers yet. I had learned to trust my instincts, and right now, my instincts told me that something was coming. But I couldn't let the team know that. I had to remain the pillar of stability they needed. Days turned into weeks, and the threat loomed over me like a storm cloud that refused to break. Then, as if to drive the point home, I received an anonymous package at the office. It was small, unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the decision pressing on me. Should I open it? Should I risk whatever might be inside? I plugged it into my computer and waited as the files loaded. My heart raced. What I saw on the screen took my breath away. It was a compilation of personal emails and conversations, things that should never have been leaked, and all of it tied back to my time as CEO. They weren't just rumors, this was targeted. Someone had been gathering information on me, digging through every misstep I had made, every wrong decision, and they had compiled it into a dossier. But there was something else. The last file opened was a video, and the timestamp was recent. I clicked it, and the screen came to life. It was Duncan. And he was speaking to someone else, someone I didn't recognize. "You'll never be able to take her down without the right leverage," Duncan was saying. "But if we can turn the board against her, we'll have everything we need." The video cut off abruptly, leaving my hands trembling. I felt a shift inside me, a clarity that I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of the situation no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like the first step toward something bigger. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to fight back. That evening, I reached out to a few trusted allies within the company, key players who had always stood by me, even when the tides were rough. One of them, Mara, had been with the company for over a decade, and her loyalty to the business was unmatched. We met in my office after hours, and I didn't mince words. "I'm going to need your help," I said, locking the door behind us. "I've got evidence that Duncan Hayes, along with someone else in our company, has been actively working to bring me down. They're trying to hamper everything we've worked for. Mara's eyes widened, her usually calm demeanor shifting into something sharper. I knew something wasn't right, she said quietly. You've been getting a lot of pressure from the board lately. It was strange how they started questioning your decisions after all this time. And Duncan? He's always been off. Exactly, I replied, running my fingers through my hair. I need you to gather information, everything we have on Duncan and anyone else who might be involved. I don't care how you do it, just get it. We need to know who we're really up against. Mara nodded, her face serious. I've got your back, Izzy. You won't be alone in this. As we talked through the details, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of the old fire returning, the same fire that had gotten me into this position in the first place. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for the integrity of the company, for everyone who believed in me, and for myself. The next few days were a blur. Mara worked tirelessly behind the scenes, digging into every aspect of the company's operations. She knew where to look, who to talk to, and how to get the information we needed. She didn't just have access to corporate files, she had the trust of many employees who had worked alongside Duncan and knew how he operated. In the meantime, I took a step back and focused on strengthening my own position. I couldn't just react to the conspiracy, I had to stay proactive. I called another board meeting, my first since the initial fallout with Duncan. The room was filled with familiar faces, some tense, others curious. Duncan was no longer present, and while that should have felt like a victory, I knew it wasn't enough. I needed the board to see me as their leader, not just as the CEO by default. Thank you all for coming, I began, standing at the head of the table. I kept my voice steady, but there was an edge to it now, a confidence I hadn't let slip through before. As we've seen in the past few weeks, there are serious matters that need to be addressed. Our company's integrity, our future, everything is at stake. I paused, letting my words sink in. I've received troubling information about some of the individuals within this room and their actions that have threatened the stability of this company. This is not something I take lightly. The room was silent. I could see the unease flicker across a few faces, but no one spoke. They weren't ready to question me, not yet. They were too busy watching, waiting to see how I would handle this. I have evidence, I said, letting the words hang in the air, and I will take legal action if necessary to protect this company from anyone who seeks to undermine it. We will not allow ourselves to be manipulated, not by outsiders and certainly not by those within our own walls. That was the moment I realized just how far I'd come. The fear of losing control was no longer there. I wasn't pleading for their respect. I was demanding it. There was a long pause before Martin, one of the more senior board members, cleared his throat. Izzy, I think we all appreciate your leadership through these difficult times, he said, his voice measured. But we need to see this evidence. We need to understand what's going on before we make any decisions. I nodded. I understand, Martin. And you'll have it. But know this, I'm not going anywhere. I am the CEO of this company, and I will fight for it, for all of us. That was the turning point. I could see it in their eyes. Some were still uncertain, but others, the ones who were tired of the back and forth, the endless power struggle, started to shift in their seats, nodding as if finally recognizing that I wasn't just a placeholder in my father's chair. I was the leader now, and I was determined to protect what I had built. That evening, Mara came to me with what we had been waiting for, the missing pieces of the puzzle. It turned out that Duncan hadn't been acting alone. There were several others within the company who had been feeding him information, providing him with ways to undermine my leadership. It wasn't just hampered, it was a carefully orchestrated effort to have me removed from my position, to destabilize the company and weaken my authority. One name stood out among the others, Andrew Parks. Andrew had been a trusted partner for years, but he had his own interests at stake. He'd been working behind the scenes, orchestrating meetings with our competitors, promising them insider information in exchange for personal gain. But what surprised me the most was the depth of his involvement. He wasn't just after money. He wanted control. He wanted the company for himself. I was furious. But I wasn't going to act rashly. I needed to be strategic. Andrew had his hands in so many pots, it was going to take time to gather the evidence I needed to bring him down without causing irreparable damage to the company. Mara and I spent the next few weeks in a tense, quiet battle, gathering everything we could. We traced Andrew's communications, tracked the deals he'd been making, and collected the proof that would finally expose his treachery. In the meantime, I also had to navigate the delicate balance of keeping the company afloat. The press was relentless, and our competitors weren't waiting around for us to sort things out. Every decision I made felt like it was under a microscope. Every move I made had to be calculated, every word I spoke, measured. I couldn't afford any mistakes. But as the pressure mounted, I found a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. There was a part of me that thrived in this environment, where every decision, every action, carried weight. It was like a test, one I was determined to pass. Finally, after weeks of digging and planning, we had everything we needed. The evidence was irrefutable. It was time to confront Andrew and take action. I called him into my office, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived. As he walked into the room, I couldn't help but notice how calm he looked, how confident he still seemed despite the storm brewing around him. "You wanted to see me, Izzy?" he asked, his voice smooth and measured. He still had no idea that I knew everything. "Yes, Andrew," I said, standing up from my desk and meeting his gaze. "We need to talk about your role in all of this." The look of confusion on his face was almost too much to bear. But I held my ground. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about taking back control. "I've got the evidence," I continued. "Everything. Your meetings with our competitors, your deals with them behind our backs, everything." He froze. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. The confident exterior faded, replaced by something else. Fear. He knew his time was up. "I didn't think you'd find out," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "You thought wrong," I said, my voice cold. I wasn't going to let him worm his way out of this. Not this time. Andrew's expression twisted from shock to anger, and for a moment, I thought he might try to deny it. But I had him cornered. There was no escaping the truth. "Izzy, you don't know what you're doing," he snapped, his voice suddenly laced with desperation. "This isn't just about you. It's about the company, the future. You're too young, too inexperienced to keep running this place. I'm the one who can take us to the next level. You don't have what it takes." I met his gaze without flinching. "You're wrong, Andrew. I have everything it takes. I built this company from the ground up. You're the one who doesn't understand what it means to be a leader. It's not about control, it's about responsibility. And you've tormented it." His anger boiled over. "You can't do this. You don't know how much power I have in this company. You can't just destroy everything I've worked for." "Destroy?" I repeated, my voice calm despite the chaos inside. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to sell us out. You thought I wouldn't fight back, but you were wrong. You misjudged me, Andrew. And now you're going to pay for it." I pulled out the stack of evidence Mara had compiled, emails, financial records, meeting notes, and set them down in front of him. "This is just the beginning, Andrew. I'm going to expose you, make sure the board sees you for what you really are. You'll never work in this industry again." His face went pale, and I could see him weighing his options. He could try to fight me, but I knew he wouldn't. He was too deeply involved, and everyone on the board would be horrified by what he had done. There was no way out for him. "I'll ruin you," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." I leaned forward slightly, not backing down. "I'm already doing what you could never do, leading this company. You're the one who's going to regret underestimating me. Don't worry, Andrew. You'll have a lot of time to think about your mistakes. After you leave." I stood up, and with one final glance at him, I walked out of my office. The feeling of power in that moment wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake, it was about taking back control. It was about making sure that people like Andrew could never again threaten what I had worked so hard to build. The following week was a whirlwind of meetings. Andrew was fired, his actions publicly exposed, and his reputation shattered. The board was in complete disarray, but in the end, they came to a unanimous decision: I was staying on as CEO, and I was more than qualified to lead the company forward. The trust in me, from the employees to the investors, grew stronger. I didn't stop there. I took swift action, ensuring that all of Andrew's deals with our competitors were nullified. I put in place tighter security measures to prevent further hampered, and I began rebuilding the team around me. It wasn't just about removing the bad apples, it was about creating a culture where integrity mattered, where loyalty meant something, and where people knew that the work they did was valued. One day, about a month after Andrew's departure, I was sitting in my office, catching up on some paperwork when Mara walked in with a smile on her face. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. "We did it," she said simply, setting a folder on my desk. I opened it and saw a report detailing the company's projections for the next quarter. It was more than I had hoped for. The new strategies were working, the markets were responding positively, and the company was poised for even greater growth. "I couldn't have done this without you," I said, looking up at her. "You were right there with me every step of the way." Mara smiled. "We've come a long way, Izzy. But this is just the beginning." And she was right. There would always be challenges, but now I knew I could face them. I had proved myself, not just to the board, not just to the employees, but to myself. A few weeks later, I received a letter. It was from my father's lawyer. When I opened it, I found a trust fund that had been set aside for me, something my father had done in case anything happened to him. The amount was significant, but that wasn't what caught my attention. What really stood out was the message inside. "Izzy, you've exceeded every expectation I had for you. I knew you could lead this company, and I'm proud of everything you've done. This trust is yours, but remember, true success isn't about wealth. It's about the legacy you build." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the words. I had always thought that my father's legacy was something I'd never be able to live up to, but in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just living in his shadow. I was creating my own. The following year, Calhoun Enterprises reached new heights. We expanded into new sectors, launched innovative products, and became a force to be reckoned with in the tech world. I had built a company that wasn't just successful, it was respected. And as for Duncan and Andrew? Their downfall was complete. They were left with nothing, their reputations in ruins, their careers destroyed by their own greed and betrayal. As the company flourished, the memory of their actions faded, overshadowed by the hard work and dedication of the people who believed in what we were building. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about proving Duncan or Andrew wrong. It was about building something that would last, something that couldn't be destroyed by lies or deceit. I had come into my own as a leader, and I wasn't going anywhere. The company was mine, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way, no matter who tried to take it from me. And that was my true victory.